Good evening, everyone. This is Spanky Gibson. I just wanted to come on tonight and I wanted to ask you, are you being controlled without knowing it? Now, you might ask why I propose this question to you. Here's the problem. I just spent the whole day in the hospital. My father-in-law, who's only been out of the hospital a week, collapsed again today, and he's back in the hospital. Hopefully tomorrow we'll figure out exactly what's going on. Now, he turned 77 last Thursday. He's a Vietnam vet, 2 tours I might add, and he's a tough old man. But I had a lot of time sitting in the hospital for almost 8 hours to think about this question. And it's based off of a video I watched this morning. It was PBD Podcast, and Patrick Bet David, who I really respect and I look up to, he proposed that same similar type of question. But he had a whole podcast on there talking about what countries outside the United States spend the most money supporting our students that are in college. Now, I don't know if any of you all have ever looked into this, but I came back, was sitting on the computer, and I started looking at this topic. I trust him emphatically, but I wanted to make sure that I looked at the data for myself. And I did. Qatar's number 1 and China's number 2. Now, I'm going to have his podcast linked in the description. I'm also going to have an article I read from last year, 2025, that gives that data. And when I say supports or I say finances, we're talking close to $13 billion to sway the opportunities for our young minds. And that's why I asked that question. Are we being controlled without knowing it? If schools receive hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and you got to admit, the United States, we have the largest bulk of college universities in the world. No one comes close. That's why we have so many foreign students that come here. But if we open that up with foreign students and we also bring in all this foreign money, well, how does that shape the minds of you, my children, in the near future? I've got a 14-year-old granddaughter, so chances are she's going to go to college in the next 3 or 4 years. How's that going to affect them? Now, I thought it was an interesting topic. Now, I've been to school numerous times, and undergraduate and graduate level. Now, for the most part, minus early back, 93, 94, 95, I was much older when I went to college. So obviously my mind is not as easy to affect or to condition to think a certain way. But think about the last couple of years. What have you seen in the last couple of years? So many schools have went against so many different individuals. They've proposed, or they've, straight up just came out and said, we support, certain countries that they thought were being, suppressed in some way or manipulated or negatively affected. In some ways, outright said that it was genocide. Yet most of these individuals that are going out there and waving a flag or, standing up for another country don't even understand the dynamics of those countries, have never been close to those countries. They're easily manipulated by propaganda or just information that will cause them to assume a certain direction. Well, what if that direction is one, untrue, and two, supported by our possible enemies. Now, I don't want to say that Qatar or China or many other countries that give our colleges, finances, I don't want to say they're our enemies, but in some ways they are. Most of these countries don't want to see us succeed. Yeah, are we still a young constitutional republic, or as some would say, a democracy? Technically, constitutional republic. We have a limited form of, democracy. But do they want us to be successful, or do they want us to fail? Why would you give someone else money? No strings attached. Would you do that? Would you loan someone that you don't know money, or maybe loan somebody you don't like money, without possibly there being some kind of expectation at the end of it? Doing it as a loan, do it as a barter, do it as work it off. There's all these different methods we can use so that when somebody might have a hardship, they don't, we don't take away their independence, but maybe we do it in a loving way that doesn't expect them to, pay back the money per se, but maybe work it off. So would common sense tell you that if China or Qatar is giving $12, $13 billion a year to colleges and universities in the United States, that it wouldn't have some form of influence? Just think back the last 4 or 5 years. Or, more importantly, if you're in college, what do you think about influences in the school? We think back to when Charlie Kirk was assassinated last September, doing what he had been doing for quite a while, opening up free speech, allowing people to disagree. He might take the upper hand in a lot of conversations, leaning on his principles, his morals, his ethics. But did he not give open dialogue? Did he not actually even ask for those who disagreed with him to come up to the front of the line? Now, I blend that part in there. And the reason I blend that part in there is who would better gain something from that situation that happened to Charlie Kirk? Would it be an ideology? Would it be another country? Would it make people fearful of that kind of speech? If someone steps up, takes Charlie's place, and then that next person has fear and isn't able to accomplish, that dialogue or that goal the way that it had previously been done. Well, if you chip away at that, that's called deep shaping. You think, I talk about being in the military for 20 plus years. We don't always affect the enemy by bombs, weapons, and attacks. We can condition a country through diplomacy. We can do it, economically. There's many ways we could do it, other than just straight up war. But then if we don't see any fruits of our labor over a period of time, we might have to be like we are in Iran. We might have to step in and fight, or do a bombing campaign, or try to get something back from that. But that economic factor, when you think of China and Qatar giving this much money, do you think they're trying to affect us a certain way? Trying to take our young minds and manipulate those minds to be against our government? And if you don't recognize it, wouldn't it turn you against, whether it's one person or one party, and then not feel like you've been manipulated? So that's my biggest question. Do you think these outside influences are controlling you, or controlling so many of you to be against our government? to be against America, the country that you have the freedoms to live in and have those opportunities to do whatever you want to do, higher education, work, military, whatever it would be. Sitting on your butt if you want to, if you can financially afford that. I really know what, I would know what you think about that. I really would like to know. Because as an outside looking in, older guy looking at the younger, my kids' age, that's what I think's going on. I think, and I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, I just really do think that there's some deep manipulation and it's being used financially, which everybody likes. They want free school or they, want a better opportunity to make more money. So I would wonder, tell me what you think. And if you like this information, I would ask you to like this video, share my channel so that I can keep growing. This is my 10th video. That's it, 10 in 4 weeks. I was supposed to be doing some traveling tomorrow and be gone for a week up in central New York. But unfortunately, I can't leave my wife right now. My wife needs me too much. I think the whole family needs me. I'm the next oldest male in the family behind my father-in-law. And I think it's important for me to be here. But I want to thank you. I want to thank you for if you stuck all the way to the end of the video. And of course, you can look up in one of these corners and some of, those other videos I've done are there. And please check them out. Give me some feedback. And I want to thank you all for watching and I appreciate your time.